Dominic was wealthy, successful, and able to give his daughter anything money could buy. But one afternoon, while picking her up from school, he witnessed something that completely changed his understanding of success, intelligence, and true wealth. Outside an elite private school, a homeless girl named Kiva was teaching his daughter math through an iron fence. With nothing but a discarded notebook and a deep love for learning. Dominic was 63 years old now, but the memory still felt close, like something that had happened just yesterday instead of more than a decade ago. Back then, he was 52, living what most people would call a perfect life. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. Dominic had built his fortune in technology. In his 20s, he'd started a small data software company in a cramped office with flickering lights and second-hand desks. Over the years, that company grew, merged, expanded, and eventually went public. By the time Dominic turned 50, he had more money than he'd ever imagined as a kid growing up in a modest neighborhood where people worked hard and hoped for stability, not luxury. Now, he lived in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city. He drove cars that never broke down. He belonged to clubs that required recommendations just to apply. His calendar was full, his phone never stopped buzzing, and his name carried weight in rooms where decisions were made. But the center of his life wasn't his wealth or his company. It was his daughter, Elodie. Elodie was 7 years old then. She had light brown hair that always looked perfectly brushed, bright eyes, and a confidence that came from never being told no. Dominic's wife had died during childbirth, and from that moment on, his world narrowed to one goal: give Elodie everything. And he did. She had nannies, tutors, language lessons, music classes, and shelves full of toys she barely touched before moving on to the next one. She attended one of the most expensive private schools in the region, a place with iron fences, manicured lawns, and classrooms filled with the latest technology. Dominic told himself he was doing the right thing. He'd grown up with very little. He remembered hand-me-down clothes, worrying about money, watching his parents stress over bills. He never wanted Elodie to feel that fear. What he didn't realize was that in protecting her from hardship, he was also shielding her from empathy. Elodie had become sharp-tongued and dismissive. She spoke down to staff. She ignored children she thought weren't on her level. Her teachers reported that she refused to work in groups, mocked classmates who struggled, and had a habit of making others cry with cutting remarks that sounded far too grown-up for a child her age. Dominic tried to correct her behavior, but his efforts were inconsistent. He was often traveling, often exhausted, and far too used to solving problems with money instead of presence. The people around Elodie, well-meaning but overly careful employees, rarely challenged her. She was growing up brilliant and confident, but also cold. That worried him more than he liked to admit. One autumn afternoon, Dominic left work early to pick Elodie up from school himself. It was unusual. Normally, their driver handled it. But after another tense meeting with her teachers, Dominic promised himself he would try to be more involved. The school sat in a wealthy district filled with cafes, boutiques, and quiet tree-lined streets. Dominic parked a block away and decided to walk the rest of the distance. As he approached the school gate, he spotted Elodie near the iron fence that separated the school grounds from the sidewalk. She wasn't alone. Standing beside her was another girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. It was hard to tell because she was painfully thin. Her clothes hung loosely on her body, a faded dress that looked too big and too worn. Her sneakers were frayed and patched together with strips of tape. Her hair was tangled, like it hadn't seen a brush in days. Everything about the girl suggested instability. Poverty. A life that didn't pause for comfort. But that wasn't what stopped Dominic in his tracks. The girl was teaching Elodie something. Dominic slowed his steps and stayed a few feet back, out of sight. The two girls were bent over a notebook resting against the fence. If you move this number over here, the girl was saying, pointing carefully, you have to change the sign. That's where most people mess up. Elodie nodded, her face serious, focused in a way Dominic rarely saw. Oh, Elodie said. That makes way more sense than how it was explained in class. The girl smiled. It wasn't forced or shy. It was warm and genuine. My teacher showed me this last year, she said. Before we had to leave. Elodie leaned closer. I like math. It's like puzzles. Once you understand it, everything fits. The girl's smile widened. Exactly. Want to try another one? Elodie nodded eagerly. Dominic felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't the daughter he saw at home. This Elodie was listening. Asking questions. Respectful. She wasn't talking down or acting bored. She was engaged. And the girl teaching her, this child who looked like she had nothing, was patient, confident, and calm. They worked through another problem together. Then another. Finally, Elodie looked up and said, "What's your name?" "I'm Kiva," the girl replied. "Kiva Lane." "I'm Elodie." "That's a pretty name." "Thanks," Elodie said. "You're really smart. Where do you go to school?" Kiva's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough that Dominic noticed. Her shoulders dipped slightly. "I don't go to school anymore," she said quietly. "Not since the summer." Elodie frowned. "Why not?" "We had to leave our apartment," Kiva explained. "Now it's just me and my mom. We move around a lot." Elodie's eyes widened. "Where do you live?" "Sometimes in our car. Sometimes at a shelter if there's space." Elodie was silent for a moment. "But, how do you learn things?" Kiva shrugged gently. "I read library books when I can. And I remember what my teachers taught me. I practice in my head." She lifted the notebook slightly. "I found this in a trash bin. Someone only used a few pages." Dominic felt his throat tighten. "That's not fair," Elodie said suddenly. "Everyone should get to go to school." "I know," Kiva replied softly. "My mom says maybe someday." She glanced at the school building behind the fence. "I come here sometimes after classes end. You can hear the teachers through the windows. Sometimes I see the board." "You learned this from watching?" Elodie asked. Kiva nodded. "Last week. I saw it through the window." That was when Dominic stepped forward. "Elodie." She turned instantly. "Daddy." Elodie's face lit up. She grabbed Kiva's arm without thinking. "This is Kiva. She's teaching me math and she's really smart and she should go to our school but she can't because she doesn't have a home." Kiva immediately stiffened. Fear flashed across her face. Dominic knelt so he was at eye level. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not angry." Kiva didn't respond, but she didn't run. "What's your age, Kiva?" Dominic asked. 8. "I'll be 9 soon." "And you taught yourself this?" She nodded. "That's impressive," Dominic said honestly. "Do you like other subjects?" "I love reading. And science." Her voice cracked. "I miss school." Dominic glanced at his watch. "Where's your mother?" "At the public library. I'm supposed to meet her there." "Would it be alright if we drove you there?" he asked. "I'd like to talk to her." Kiva hesitated. "People don't usually help us." "I know," Dominic said. "But I'd like to try." After a long pause, she nodded. In the car, Elodie talked non-stop, asking Kiva questions about books and numbers and planets. Kiva answered easily, her confidence returning. Dominic watched from the front seat, stunned. At the library, they found Ruth at a computer terminal, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. When she saw Kiva with strangers, panic flashed across her face. "It's okay," Kiva said quickly. "They're nice." Ruth didn't look convinced. Dominic introduced himself and explained what he'd seen. Ruth listened, silent at first. Then her composure cracked. "We're trying," she said quietly. "I promise we are." Kiva spoke before Dominic could. "Mom skipped lunch again." Ruth sat down heavily. Dominic didn't interrupt. And in that quiet corner of the library, everything began to change. The library was quiet in that familiar way only libraries ever are. Soft keyboard taps, the low hum of air conditioning, pages turning somewhere in the distance. Ruth sat in the chair like her strength had suddenly drained away. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just stared at the floor, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Dominic waited. He had learned long ago that real stories don't rush themselves. "I'm trying," Ruth finally said, her voice shaking. "I really am. I lost my job almost a year ago when the company downsized. I was an office coordinator. I handled schedules, payroll, vendors, everything. But once we fell behind on rent, everything else followed. She swallowed hard. The landlord gave us notice. I thought I could fix it. I applied everywhere. But once you don't have an address, people stop calling back. Childcare costs more than most entry-level jobs pay. And shelters are full more nights than not. Kiva stood close to her mother, silent now, her earlier confidence replaced by worry. We slept in the car last night, Ruth admitted. I told Kiva it was like camping. She pretended to believe me. Dominic felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He looked at Kiva, this child who had stood outside a school fence teaching math, not asking for anything in return. Then he looked at Elodie, who was unusually quiet, her small hand gripping the edge of her jacket. An idea had already formed in Dominic's mind. Not a vague feeling. A clear decision. What if, Dominic said slowly, this wasn't about charity? Ruth looked up, confused. What if this was about opportunity, he continued. About recognizing ability and doing something practical with it. She didn't respond, but she listened. I run a foundation connected to my company, Dominic said. It supports education initiatives and community programs. Right now, we need someone organized, dependable, and capable of managing operations. Ruth frowned. I don't understand. I'm offering you a job, he said simply. A real one. With a salary. Temporary housing to start. Help getting back on your feet. Her eyes filled instantly. And for Kiva, Dominic added, turning to the girl, I'd like to enroll her in school. Not because I feel sorry for her, but because she belongs there. The silence stretched. Ruth shook her head slowly. Why would you do this for us? Dominic didn't answer right away. He looked at Elodie. My daughter, he said, has everything money can buy. And yet today, I watched her learn more from your child than she has from years of tutoring. He turned back to Ruth. Kiva didn't just teach her math. She taught her patience. Respect. Curiosity. That matters. Ruth covered her mouth, tears slipping free. I'm not asking you to be grateful forever, Dominic continued. I'm asking you to work hard. To rebuild. To let this be a bridge, not a permanent solution. After a long, quiet moment, Ruth nodded. I can do that, she whispered. The changes didn't happen overnight. The temporary apartment Dominic arranged was modest but clean. Ruth insisted on contributing as soon as her paycheck came in. She worked harder than anyone at the foundation, arriving early, staying late, rebuilding her confidence piece by piece. Kiva started school a month later. Her first day, she wore clothes donated by a local group, shoes that actually fit, and a backpack that still smelled new. She walked through the school gates with her head held high, nervous but excited. She didn't just catch up. She excelled. Teachers quickly noticed her ability, not just in math, but in reading, science, and problem-solving. She asked thoughtful questions. She helped other students without being asked. She never acted superior. Elodie changed too. At first, she struggled. Seeing Kiva succeed challenged everything she thought she knew about intelligence and privilege. But slowly, something softened in her. She started sharing instead of showing off. Listening instead of dismissing. Learning instead of competing. The girls became inseparable. They studied together, laughed together, and defended each other fiercely. Elodie began standing up for kids she would have once ignored. Dominic watched it all quietly. He realized something uncomfortable and humbling. Kiva had given Elodie something no amount of wealth ever could. Perspective. 11 years passed faster than Dominic expected. Ruth moved out of the temporary apartment after 18 months, having saved enough to secure her own place. She climbed steadily at the foundation, eventually becoming a program director, designing initiatives that help families avoid homelessness before it ever began. Kiva graduated at the top of her class. She went on to university on full scholarship, studied mathematics and education, and later earned an advanced degree focused on teaching underserved students. Today, she designs curriculum used in schools across the country. Elodie is 18 now. She's preparing for college with plans to study education policy and social work. She volunteers weekly. She tutors kids who remind her of the girl she once met outside a fence. She and Kiva are still best friends. One evening not long ago, Elodie told her father something that stayed with him. She had every reason to be angry, Elodie said. But instead, she taught me. Dominic often thinks back to that autumn afternoon. He could have ignored what he saw. He could have told Kiva to move along, told himself it wasn't his problem. Instead, he stopped. He listened. And by choosing to invest in people instead of just programs, he learned the most important lesson of his life. That real wealth isn't money. It's character. It's kindness. It's recognizing potential where others see inconvenience. A homeless child with a notebook taught his daughter algebra that day. But she also taught him something far more valuable. That sometimes, the greatest teachers stand outside the fence, waiting to be seen.